Hi, and welcome to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs of the regenerative movement. People who are committed to and showcase qualities of planetary leadership. My name is Julian Guderley. I'm committed to a world that allows people from all walks of life to thrive. We just launched a Patreon with Green Planet, Blue Planet. Go check it out. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. And in today's episode, my guest is Rishi Chidananda. Welcome, Rishi.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited for our conversation. Rishi is in New York as we're having this conversation, but he has spent the latter part of his life as a monk studying the philosophical traditions of India and gaining deep insights into their hidden meaning and timeless practices that are particularly relevant in this day and age. And before his spiritual path entered his life, he was a successful investment banker and entrepreneur. So now, a decade later, his full circle in New York City with a mission that he's going to share quite a bit more about. And Rishi, I'd love to start just by understanding this fascinating life journey that you're on a little bit better.
Sure. The funny thing is that my skin color is brown, and I was born in India, in South India. But when I was a very little child, we moved to the United States. So I spent the majority of my life in the West. And so, as it goes, when you move in to a Western environment, you try and fit in. So most of my life, I grew up going to school, going to university, and really focusing on, let's say, the material aspects of life. Doing well in school, making sure that I have all of the material things that I need. And so, in this process, I was not spiritual at all. There was no spirituality that I followed, and I was very, very much just focused on the material things, which a lot of us are. And so, in this process, after graduating from university, I went into investment banking. So I was doing mergers and acquisitions, and in this field, I went even deeper into the material things. Yeah. I remember I was 21, and my boss came and gave me a check for $40,000. It was the most money that I think I'd ever seen times 20. And he said with the check, go buy yourself some nice shoes, a nice suit, and come back here looking presentable. And so that's how my career started, was with that check and that statement. So you could only imagine how it went from there. And so, in this process, I went deeper and deeper into the material pursuits. And at the same time, I also was with a girlfriend of mine that I was dating for about 7 years or so. And there was a point in time when I was around 25 where I said I need to get married. Yeah, I need to go to the next stage of this path, which was to have children, get married, have a house, maybe even a minivan. All of these things
Yeah.
that we see on the TV. I don't know about the minivan. I don't know if I would have gone that far, but that process. And so as this was happening, I got a ring and I proposed to her, and she did say yes. We were dating for 7 years, but in that moment, something happened which I couldn't really explain. And I really felt that even though everything was moving according to plan, or how I planned it, it seemed like something wasn't right. So as the wedding started to get closer and closer, this feeling started to get stronger and stronger that somehow maybe this isn't how it should be, or this isn't how it should go. And I couldn't quantify it in any way, but it was just this feeling that something was not right. And so at this point, we had a conversation together and we spoke about these feelings, and we both sort of decided, you know what, let's take a break, let's kind of separate. And so in that separation, it was very, very powerful, because afterwards, I didn't have anything to turn to. You know, what's really beautiful about what you're doing is that there's something that drives you, right? There is the motivation for world peace. So there is something that allows you to wake up every day where you find meaning and purpose. And for me, I didn't have that at all. You know, even though I was making money and I was doing the job, there wasn't a meaning and purpose driven life. It was more a material gratification type of life. And so there was a big difference in that. And so because of that, and because I didn't really find fulfillment, I went more and more into the material world. So I used to go out all of the time. I used to drink all of the time, party all of the time. And then a friend of mine, or a cousin of mine, I should say, came and visited me in the States. And he saw how I was living, and he looked at me and he said, look, you have to change. If you don't change, it's not going to be good for you. And so I said, okay, what do I do? How can I make that change happen? And he said, read this book. It's called Autobiography of a Yogi. And so, you know, we've talked about this book before as well between us. And this book was written by a great saint who had moved to the States. And he talks a lot about the philosophy of Vedanta, which is the root of a lot of the Indian tradition that we know as Hinduism. Yeah. And so it talks about spiritually enlightened beings, and the guru-disciple relationship, various aspects of spirituality. And so I read the book, and I read it literally in one day, maybe 2 days at the most.
Wow.
Yeah. And
little side note for anyone who knows the Autobiography of a Yogi. I mean, if you don't know it, please put it on your reading list. But if you do know it, that's a tough read to read in 1 or 2 days. Like, something must have really, really resonated deeply with you.
Yeah, I couldn't explain it. You know, it was just something that I put all of my focus on. And I finished the book, but even after I finished it, I was just thinking, oh, enlightened beings, yogis living for 5,000 years, you know, this is crazy. This can't be true. And so I put the book away, kind of dismissing it, even though I had read it in 2 days. But it had a huge impact on me, because afterwards something triggered, and I literally, I could not go out anymore. I couldn't go to parties anymore. I could not drink anymore. Even the thought of taking something was sort of almost nauseating inside of me. And my friends would tell me, like, what is wrong with you? Why are you not going out? Why are you not coming out with us? And I couldn't explain it, but just something in me just triggered a reaction where I literally was more happy just being by myself in my room than going out and partying and drinking and becoming intoxicated and all of these different things. So it was really it was an interesting moment in my life, I would say. And so in that process, I started to feel that I wanted to go and leave the States and to explore what the world has to offer, just to go and explore and just, you know, to see how things were. So I had planned a trip to go and visit Italy, Spain, not Germany, because Germany was too cold for me, but Italy, Spain, Portugal, and all of the nice places in Europe. And
A
it
little
was,
sightseeing tour in Europe. I get it.
yes, exactly. And so, you know, and this was supposed to be at most 1 month or so. And I also had planned to spend a few days in India and the Himalayan mountains, just because that area was really, really resonated with me. I wouldn't even say it was something spiritual. It was just it was just the beauty of it was just very, very humbling, I would say. And I just wanted to visit it, that space. And so I remember the last day I was in the States, I was with my friends in the bar, and you know, they looked at me and they said, oh, you know, you'll be back in a few days. You'll get sick of it after 2 weeks. You know, we know you. You're not gonna enjoy it. And I was like, maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe. And and that night I remember, I drank alcohol, I ate meat, I was in a relationship, and that was the last 3 times that I did any of those things. Once I took the flight out of the United States. And I remember I was with my mother, and I was like, I'll be back in a few weeks. And she started to cry. And I'm like, why are you crying? And she's like, I don't know. I just have this feeling that I'm not going to see you for a very long time. Mothers
Wow.
mothers have an intuition sometimes where they feel it, even though we might not even be aware of it, or even though they might not be aware of it. So it's interesting. So I landed in a town called Rishikesh, and it was I would say at that point it was a spiritual town. There was no meat, there's no alcohol, very much focused on spiritual transformation. And usually, like when you go to these types of places, your body also goes through a energetic purification, because you're in a space which is very high vibration. And sometimes when we spend a lot of our times in a low vibration environment, and you transition, the body has to go through that process of purification. And so for me, I started to fall really, really sick the first few days I was there. And I found myself just sort of in a delirium, going to the Ganga, which was the river that was running where I was staying, and just calling out and just saying, if there's a God, if there's something out there, why do I feel so empty? Why do I feel so alone? Why do I not have any purpose or meaning in my life? And it was a very sincere call that I sort of sent forth. And the very next day, there was a monk that was staying in the same place I was. And at the time, it was not a tourist time; it was winter time, so nobody was around. And his spiritual teacher had told him 3 months earlier to go to this place on this day and wait there. So he was from South Africa. So he caught a plane and he was just waiting there due to his spiritual teacher's orders, without understanding why he was there. And so ironically, I meet him and we connect immediately. I see him and he's very interesting, the way he's dressed and how he looks. And we started to have a conversation on the bench facing the Ganga. And we're talking about life, we're talking about all kinds of different things. And at one moment, he says, I'm a monk, I have a guru, his name is Paramahamsa Vishwananda, he's an enlightened being. And he starts to talk a lot about all of these different things. And once again, I was like, this guy is crazy. This is insane. This stuff doesn't really enlighten beings. What is all of this stuff? It's not true. So I literally go up to stand up, to leave, to run away, actually. And in that moment, I felt like a veil was just dropped. Like imagine that you were watching black and white TV, and then all of a sudden you started to watch HD TV. It was just as quick as that.
Switch turned on. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And in that moment, I looked and I literally could perceive everything around me. I could perceive the blades of grass. I could perceive the insects, the animals, the wind. And in this moment, I felt this sort of intense love that I couldn't explain for everything around me. And, it was one of those moments like, you could love your children, you could love your girlfriend or your wife, the honeymoon stage. But imagine that love multiplied and felt for literally everything around you. And I felt so much love. I felt like I was drowning in the love. Yeah, I couldn't even hold on to it. I started to cry because it was just too much. And and this is what we talk a lot about. This is what you had mentioned in your introduction. It's like, how do we bring world peace? How do we connect? And a lot of the times, I think it's a simple thing. It's just love, and just to love everything around us in a very pure way, without expectations and judgments and all of these things. And I was very blessed in that moment to have had a little taste and experience of that. And I looked to this monk and I asked him, what is happening to me? He said, I don't know, maybe it's because you heard your spiritual teacher's name, Paramahamsa Swami Viswananda. And I said, okay, who is he? What is he? And he said, well, he'll be here in 15 days, something called the Maha Kumbh Mela. Sorry, in 21 days. And so, we had discussed this in our earlier conversations, that the Kumbh Mela is something that happens every 4 years. Mm-hmm. And there's ones that happen every 122 years. And it's a time when the planets are aligned in a certain way, where it's believed if you take a dip in the water during that time, your spiritual evolution is fast forwarded. Your spiritual growth is fast forward. And this particular one was happening after 122 years. And I found myself 3 days from it happening. And this was just by pure coincidence.
Well, if we believe in coincidence. The serendipity of you lining up for that unique moment. I mean, you briefly touched on the amount of separation you were, going through and experiencing, but this is one of the interesting languages of the universe, serendipity, or that circumstance, right? Where suddenly timing seems just perfect.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the thing, everything in life has a right time, a right moment. And the thing is, most of us, we do a hard time with accepting the will of life. Sometimes we try and force things. And so like the art is to do our duty, to do our work, to wake up every day, do everything that we need to do, but not be attached to the fruits of our actions. Mm-hmm. We're able to these two of work and pray. So there was a saint in the Christian path called Saint Benedict, and he had a very beautiful saying. He said, "Work and pray." Mm-hmm. So for most of us, we either work and we don't pray, or others we pray too much and we don't work. I find that combination between work and pray, which really allows us to manifest what we are trying to achieve in this world.
Ora et labora, yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. The reflection that we have a society that either works without believing in prayer, or a new age spirituality that is like not grounded in physical activity and actually coming back to work, right?
Exactly.
Rishi, there's something really interesting that just came up in you going through your story, and I want to pick up there in a second. 21 days before the big moment after 122 years. But what you just mentioned really relates to, well, the state of the world and what's happening in this movement of regeneration on our planet, and that is this understanding of right timing, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, we come out of a dying paradigm where man, specifically man, right, has understood its role to dominate nature and everything in its path. And we've, I guess, in this time now in the 21st century, we've come to really understand the limitations of that paradigm and how that paradigm is not set for an abundant future. And definitely not for a future in which abundantly everyone is provided for. And so that notion, going from domination consciousness into alignment consciousness with nature, I think is something that at a large, we as humanity are going through. We're really seeing the dying paradigm of domination. We're seeing its last tentacles of power. We're seeing its last attempts to break what's still able to be broken. But then really, when we go into the emerging and birthing paradigm of alignment, we see proof and proof and proof and proof again, if you call it spirit or God, if you just call it serendipity, that life itself has, or biomimicry, life itself has a level of intelligence that when we match up with it, when we listen, and then we bring the ingenious human skill to the table, a complete new experience is possible.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this just requires the humbling of the ego. because a lot of us, we're so focused on the material world. We're so focused on how that our actions are the most important, or we have this even this concept that we are better than others. And as long as that paradigm is there, we're never going to be able to transition. But once we start to realize that actually there's no difference between you and me, at the end of the day, we're both divine. And to see how we can come together in a state of love rather than a state of ego, I believe is one of the only ways to really bring about an impactful change in this world.
Yeah, beautifully put. I mean, I could go rant on now how that relates to, again, the dying system and how we've created it through law and government, and how we now have to bring this love and peace of the humbled ego into this.
Yes.
I don't want to call it 3D. We don't have to bring that into 3D, but we will want to connect our lawmaking and the way we govern and the way we've built systems into a way that it mimics and reflects this peace, this love, this humbled ego, which is worth a whole conversation, because that's the only way forward. Is as you said, like about 5 minutes ago, you said we can't really fight with reality, right? And so when we stop fighting with reality, what's left is us accepting reality and then playing with reality.
It's very true.
I want to come back to your story, Rishi, because I'm fascinated. It's so, like, I'm following you and every word you're sharing, because it's so real through your words. I'm like seeing the pictures of you arriving there, meeting your teachers, because it's so real to many people's experience, to how suddenly an internal voice, a certain form of guidance, kind of a nudge of fate, or whatever you want to call it, just starts to reroute and redirect life.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think I always say every action has a cosmic consequence. We might not perceive it in that moment, but every action that we do has a cosmic consequence. So it's so important to be aligned with our true self, to be aligned with our true nature, so that compass, that inner voice guides us in the right direction. Yeah. And also to have the awareness that sometimes we can't escape our destinies, right? As much as we might be in the world, as much as things might look very, very bad, we can't escape our destinies of what we're meant to do in this world. And to really have that faith that everything is also going to work out and play out the way it needs to. And for us just to be in a mode of service, acceptance, and humility as that process unfolds naturally, the way it needs to. Yeah, and so, I think to continue with where I had left off, so yeah, I spoke with the monk, and I said, okay, if he's going to be here in 21 days, I cancel the rest of my trip to Europe, and I just wait to see him because I want to meet him. So for the next 21 days, I canceled the trip, and we just spent time together, just talking like me and you are talking now. And I learned about the Vedic philosophy. What is Hinduism? What does it mean to have a teacher? I was also initiated into Kriya Yoga, which is an ancient yoga lineage that's passed down from Avatar Babaji in the book Autobiography of a Yogi. So I started to make all of these connections, and they were coming sort of full circle. And after 21 days, my teacher arrives in India, and I go and meet him. And he looks at me, and the first thing that he says is, "What do you want with life?" And I said, I just want to be happy. And he says, "Don't worry, you will be happy." And, at that time, happiness to me meant something much different than it means to me now. At that time, happiness meant like having a girlfriend or having a wife, having a lot of money, doing all of the material things. But now, after all of these years, happiness means something much different. And I do have to say he has delivered on his promise, but not in a way that I was expecting in that moment. And so, then afterwards he said, why don't you spend time with us for the next 20 days or the next 15 days taking part in the Kumbh Mela. So I was with him. The thing is, when you're around an enlightened being, a spiritual master, there's a certain vibration of peace that they emanate, which is immensely powerful and impactful. And so for me, being around such a saint had a huge impact on me, even if it was only for 15 days. And afterwards, I asked him, what should I do now? And he said, well, come and visit me in my ashram in Germany, near Frankfurt, Germany. So I said, okay. So I packed my bags directly from India. I flew to Germany and I went to his ashram and I spent a few weeks there. And I started to realize that, the main mission for him has been to bridge the Western and Eastern ways of viewing life. To bring these traditions together, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to find peace, is when we're able to collaborate together and to accept each other's beliefs and cultures and everything else. And so that's been his main mission, is to bridge this gap. And that's why he had created the center in Frankfurt, or close to Frankfurt. As you might know, Frankfurt has the most international connections in the world, Frankfurt Airport.
It's definitely one of those amalgamation points, even just to look at the airport. I mean, Germany throughout history, having been born there in 1987 myself, there is, in its recent history, a lot of, melting together energy, let's call it this, like the Berlin Wall coming down, capitalism and the form of communism that was happening in this Soviet time kind of melting together. And now, as you said, like Frankfurt Airport, bringing people from the East and the West into the portal of the world again. It's a very interesting spot. That's for sure. What a peculiar place to choose for an ashram.
Yeah, it's not very common that you would find an ashram in the middle of Germany. As you know, you grew up there, so you've had these conversations. It's very interesting, but at the same time, very deeply symbolic of what the purpose is of having a place like that and where it is. And so, I spent a few weeks there, and then I started to really find meaning and purpose in the teachings of my spiritual teacher and what he wants to bring forth. And so I asked, can I stay a bit longer? And he said, sure. And so 3 weeks turned into 3 months. Then 3 months turned into 1 year. 1 year turned into 2 years. 2 years turned into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And the next thing I knew, I was in the ashram for 7 years. Wow. And I never went back to the United States. I never went back to America. And, I took the initiation as a monk, which means that you remain celibate. You give up your material things. You don't partake in alcohol, drugs, or meat. So there's certain vows that we take. And so I took the vow, and I lived in the ashram for 7 years.
Wow, Rishi, what a journey for you to come all the way from separation, materialistic pursuit, into this, very particular, very specific initiation. I think, you shared with me previously that, just the initiation into the Kriya Yoga lineage itself was beyond what logic might be able to comprehend. The way that, our energy body is connected throughout lifetimes, literally. And wow. But the interesting part also is that now you're in New York and you're there with a mission. I mean, you're residing there, and you're the co-founder of the Peace Center, focused on providing homeless people and those facing mental hardships, like with simple meditation practices. So how did that come about? I mean, I'm assuming you weren't sitting there for 7 years in the monastery and plotting that plan, but you were simply surrendering to the now moment in your practices.
Yeah, so I think for the last 7 years, being in an ashram, you don't gain anything material. There's no material benefits that you accrue. There's no capital things that you get. So from an external standpoint, you're not a millionaire. You're essentially homeless. But internally, you become a millionaire of the heart, because you dive deep inside to an understanding of who you are. And when you understand who you are, which is divine and eternal, the material things cease to have an effect on you. And that's when you become truly free. Because it does not matter if God makes you an emperor or puts you on the street, or it does not matter if you have $1 million or nothing. Inside, you're constantly at peace. Inside, you're in a state of equanimity. And that's the biggest value and the biggest thing that was given to me spending this time with my spiritual teacher in the ashram for 7 years. And so in this process, I also started to travel and give talks around the world on spirituality, on various Vedic Hindu scriptures, such as the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. And after some time in 2020, just following and seeing what was happening in the United States, I felt this sort of calling to leave the ashram and to spread the teachings and to talk about the path in different places around the world. And somehow it just so happened that United States ended up being the place. Because I had met a few good friends in my travels that had a space in New York City. They said, please come and stay here for 3 months. And, and please, you can operate from here, give classes here, do different things here to help to create this spiritual community. And so I was very, very blessed. And so after 7 years, I took a flight and I came to New York City, and then started the process of trying to build this peace center and this community. And a lot of this has this emphasis on helping the homeless, which is which was a mission that I was not aware of, or that I did not feel I had a connection to, till I came here. And I had some very beautiful experiences with the homeless that solidified the calling to assist them in whatever way that I can. And I can share some of those stories with you if you like, of how it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to dive deeper. I've for this episode definitely surrendered all of my regular questions because it's just such an interesting journey, Rishi, and I'm sure we'll have many conversations going forward or at another time. But for now, let's definitely dive deeper into this mission and just you're at the very beginning of it, unfolding as you step into the journey. So you said you've had your first own encounters that then basically brought out this clarity of like, yeah, this is what I'm actually doing here.
Well, yeah. So the thing is, in Hinduism, there's a strong correlation between the feminine and the masculine. And so the feminine aspect of the divine is called the Divine Mother. So she embodies mercy, grace, humility, compassion. And so we do a lot of different rituals and ceremonies and prayers to the Divine Mother to bless us so we can walk this path of the spiritual path. And so there's a celebration in Hinduism called Navaratri, which lasts for 9 days. And every day we venerate a particular characteristic and quality of the Divine Mother. And so in the ashram, it's a big deal. There's a big pujas and prayers and all of these things. But unfortunately here, that's not possible. But I was lucky enough that there's a beautiful church outside of where I live. And there's a statue of Mother Mary, who for me represents the divine, the feminine divine. And so I decided that every day for these 9 days, I'm going to take a rose and offer it to this statue, just as my personal sort of prayer for her during this time. And so the first day I go, I buy a rose and I offer it to her and I do a prayer, meditate. And then afterwards I go for a little walk around the church. And so I go for a walk and I come back and I see this homeless man and he has his pants down and he's urinating everywhere. All over where the rose was, all over where I did my prayers, all over where the statue of the Divine Mother was. And I'm observing this, and there is a state of anger that comes out initially. How dare this person defile this place? How dare that this, how can he do this? Does he not have any understanding of how sacred this place is? And so all of these things start to come up inside of me. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I look at her, and she's looking at this person, and she's smiling and laughing and showing so much compassion to him. And in that moment when I looked at her, I started to realize that this Divine Mother, she loves all of her children. She loves the saints just as much as she loves the sinners. She loves the people in the ashram just as much as she loves the people on the streets. And so for her, there is no difference as to who the person is. Her love is equal to all of her creation. And so that was such a beautiful and amazing moment for me to experience and to understand that in the same way the Divine Mother loves her creation, we also should love in the same way. And that was my first sort of understanding of that, to really help the people that are in need most, and to be there for them in whatever way that God can allow me to do so.
Wow. Love is truly unconditional, and it's certainly challenging when these things happen, but an interesting perspective that you had the patience to see it through Mother Mary's eyes first. Did you end up having a conversation with that individual, or did you just let that all pass?
The realization started to come afterwards. So I let that pass the way it needed to pass. And what was funny is that on the second to last day of the Navaratri, where we celebrate the Divine Mother, once again I was walking the streets, and as I was walking the streets, I was in Manhattan, somewhere in downtown, and there was a homeless man that started to come towards me. And so as he started to pass, we saw each other and we looked at each other in the eyes, and there was like an instant moment of like a connection, of like a love, like some type of spark. And we both sort of stopped in our tracks, and he looked at me and he said, "Can I walk with you?" He didn't ask for money, he didn't ask for anything, he just said, "Can I walk with you?" I said, "Sure, if you'd like to walk with me, let's walk." So we started to walk, and we talked about various things of life, and he asked for my name, and I said, "It's Rishi." And then we came to a crossroads, and we went our separate ways. The next day, the final day of the Navaratri, of the celebrations of the Divine Mother, I was in a completely different part of town, in a random subway station. As you know, there's thousands of subway stations. And the very next day, mind you, and I'm sitting waiting for a train, and all of a sudden I hear to my ear, "Hello, Rishi." And I look over, and it is the same exact homeless person. And keep in mind, you never see the same person twice in New York City. And I saw this person the very next day in a completely different part of town, in a random subway station. And I was shocked. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he points to this red line on my face, which represents the Divine Mother. And he says, "The Divine Mother connected us again." I never spoke to him about Navaratri. I never told him it was the celebrations. He knew nothing about these things, but he just points and said, "The Divine Mother connected us." And he said, "Do you mind if I just ride with you in the subway station?" I said, "Sure, if you like." So we started to ride in the subway station, and we talked, and I asked him, I was just completely taken back. And I said, "What do you feel that I should do to help to grow the mission?" And he says, "Live in truth. Live in truth." I said, "Okay." And then the subway station comes to an end, and he has to go, and he gives me a big hug. And he looked at me, and this is the final day of Navaratri, the final celebration night. And he says, "May the Divine Mother and all of her children bless you." He gives me a big hug, and he leaves, and I never saw him again.
Wow. The stories of New York City, I bet that alone is worth a whole pursuit of a book or a podcast or an interview series, is those stories of serendipity that, random, not so random subway station reunites you. there is a big power in, at least on a subtle level, that I've experienced in the role homeless people play in our Western world. And sometimes the way I go into this is, when we zoom out on the timeline into a 7 generational perspective of what's happening here, what does the word homeless really mean? How do we have homeless people when we have empty homes? How
Mm,
did we ever make sense of that? Like, how does that justify in our brain that we're like, oh yeah, no, but that person didn't make the cut, they're homeless. And then, so I can chuckle about it from my place of privilege. Maybe for some other people that's much more challenging, but the reason why I choose to chuckle about it is because the nonsensicalness of it, the part that doesn't actually make sense, is, I believe, kind of the gateway to what's next, which is building bridges, building opportunities, building spaces to learn from each other, because clearly that individual had um, his very own access to, the divine mother talking to him.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the main catalyst for me. And in that moment, I started to realize that. So I really wanted to work with the homeless, and so we're doing this mantra called Om Namo Narayanaya, and we're chanting it for 15 minutes, 10 days. And I saw it had huge impacts on the people that are doing it around me. And I wanted to also bring it to the people that might not have access to it. And so that was sort of the original sort of catalyst to help and bring this mantra and this meditation to the homeless. And what was really interesting as this mantra movement started to happen, uh, the first day I went and to a park where there was a lot of homeless people. And I just said, would you like to do a mantra meditation? The first thing the homeless person said to me was, no, I'm hungry. I want to eat. I don't want to do a meditation. And that was like, oh, that was like, oh, okay, wow, he's right. That needs to happen. And I went to the next person. Same thing. I can't concentrate on a mantra when I'm hungry. And then I went to another lady. I just approached her. She looked at me and she ran away. And so it was like such an humbling moment to understand, what is this about? It's not just about giving a mantra and a meditation. It's actually a very holistic approach where you give the people food, some tea, you sit down, you speak with them, get to know them. And in that process, if they are open and wanting to do a meditation, then you can offer that as a service. And so that's what I've really learned. That's what's really humbled me, is to really take the time to get to know them. Because you see, when life has taken everything away from you, there's a certain amount of humility that arises and a certain amount of wisdom. And so, regardless of how it happened, maybe through drugs, other circumstances, whatever it was, it happened. The reality now is that everything has been taken away from them. And maybe, they're doing drugs, maybe they're addicted, maybe there are different things they're facing and struggling with. But at the end of the day, they're human just like us. And they have wisdom to give that not a lot of us can give, because not a lot of us have ever been put in a situation where life has literally taken everything away from us. And when that happens, there is a certain wisdom that arises. And if you're willing to listen to it, can have a big impact on your life. So this process, I've learned so much from them, just in the process of giving food and just talking with them, regardless of the meditations. And so now that is sort of the process that I've been doing with the mantra movement, is really focusing on the food and getting to know them. And throughout that conversation, if something else arises, then that's God's will.
Beautiful. Well, Rishi, for this time, we're kind of approaching the end of our episode, and I want to make sure that you get to, invite those who are listening into your process. So if there is a form to get in touch with you, if there is, for there's millions of people who live in New York, and I'm
Yeah.
sure we're all only 1 or 2 degrees away from being connected with each other. So, especially for those who could physically be in a similar location or have friends that are, what are some great ways to connect with you, and what really is also um, yeah, helpful? What's actually meeting you in that mission?
Thank you for that. I think the best thing is, obviously living in an ashram. I was not into social media or any of those things, but being here in New York City, I realized that social media plays an integral part in the connections that we make. And so I've been using Instagram. And so if anybody is interested in connecting, please feel free just to send me a message on Instagram, and I could share some more information about how you could possibly donate to the cause to help bring food and water and meditation. Also, how if you're living around here, you can come and join a meditation that we're having on a weekly basis. Or if you yourself want to do the mantra project, it requires 15 minutes, 10 days with a specific mantra. We can do that on Zoom as well. So I think the first step is just to reach out to me on Instagram, or I can also provide an email that you might want to put in the link, and then we can just have a conversation and see how we can be of service to each other.
Wonderful. I will definitely link out your Instagram and your email in the show notes of this episode. My closing question for today is I'm just really curious. I've asked this every single person on the show, and you know, let's together, Rishi, zoom out for those 7 generations, just for the moment of now. And my question to you is, what is the message or the dream that's in your soul, in your heart, that you're here to live or embody as, quote unquote, like a good ancestor to the future, a good ancestor to those 7 generations? So what's your dream for the earth that's coming through you?
I think it's just 2 words: just love.
Just love. That's a really, really beautiful answer to this question. I invite all of us to take this into our day as it's the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Rishi, for your wisdom, for your insights, for your story, for sharing it publicly, and for walking the walk you're walking. In deep gratitude to who you are. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. Take care. Namaste.